The classroom was shaped like a spiral seashell, with tiers of desks climbing upward in a coil. Fluorescent blue light pulsed from the walls, not because anyone needed it to see, but because the instructor believed it encouraged cerebral fluidity. At the center stood the instructor himself, Instructor Vel. His skin was a matte zinc gray, with gentle ridges that ran from his temple to his lower jaw. He had no visible mouth, only a voice that seemed to radiate from his chest like a speaker. "Humans," Vel announced, "are unsuited for rapid code production." From his desk near the back, Matthew Weller blinked. He'd been stirring a protein paste with a stylus, trying to convince himself it tasted like chicken soup. It didn't. "Excuse me," Matthew raised his hand slowly, elbow still planted on the desk. "Did you say humans can't code fast?" "I did not say cannot," Vel corrected. "I said unsuited. Their minds are cluttered. They require sleep cycles, emotional regulation, and caffeine. Their neural pathways are inefficient." "That's a hell of a claim coming from someone who still uses semicolons at the end of every statement," Matthew muttered. Vel turned his head. "You will step forward." Now, Matthew stood, brushing paste off his jumpsuit, and made his way to the front of the room. He passed students from 7 different species, each with their own computing devices, some biological, some mechanical, some a mix of both. The humans were outnumbered 4-1. No one said anything, but a few eyes followed him with that subtle, pitying curiosity usually reserved for someone walking into a trap. "I assume you are familiar with the Listari Protocol Challenge," Vel said, already queuing up a diagram on the central projector. Matthew stepped up to the console. "You mean the one where we have to extract real-time data from a volatile stream and sort it into concurrent queues while checking for recursive anomalies?" "Yes," Vel said. "That one." Matthew tilted his head. "How long do you give your students to complete it?" 30 galactic minutes, Vel said, "and that is considered extremely ambitious." Matthew scratched his chin. "Give me 5. There was a ripple of movement across the room. Some of the alien students leaned forward. A few exchanged glances. Vel, for his part, remained motionless. 5, Vel asked. "You misunderstand. This is not a primitive sorting task. You must also encode logic for self-healing threads. Any failure to maintain real-time performance is an automatic fail." "Yeah," Matthew said, already tapping commands into the console. "I've read the specs. Let's roll." Vel remained silent. The lights dimmed around the projection area as Matthew pulled up a blank editor. He cracked his knuckles. It wasn't for show. His fingers were stiff. They'd been cold since the station's temperature regulators broke last week. The first minute was just setup. Matthew configured his environment, called in the libraries, and mapped out the stream structure. He didn't rush. There was no point. The key to writing fast wasn't moving fast. It was thinking clearly. Minute 2, he built the stream parser. It had to be thread-safe and fault-tolerant. He wrote a custom queue handler instead of using the pre-built ones. The aliens watching couldn't tell, but Vel could. Matthew could feel Vel's stare. At minute 3, Matthew started writing the anomaly detection logic. The signature patterns were fractal, but the trick was to flatten the recursion into a bounded loop and use a rolling hash. He'd done something similar back in his second year at the University of Chicago, trying to detect packet injection in a decentralized mesh. By minute 4, the code was compiling. Matthew tapped his foot, watching the logs roll by. No errors, no warnings. He loaded up the test stream and fed it into the system. The final minute he spent watching the results. The queues self-balanced. The anomalies were flagged and quarantined. The processor load stayed under 70%, even with the simulation set to double speed. Matthew stepped back from the console with 15 seconds to spare. Vel stared at the output. His body didn't move, but the lights in his chest shifted from cool amber to a flickering green. "You did not write that from memory," Vel said. "I didn't memorize it," Matthew replied. "I just know how to think through it. You used no reference documentation. Didn't need to." Vel turned to the rest of the class. This is unexpected. Matthew folded his arms. Look, I get it. Humans aren't built like you. We don't have distributed cognition or binary memory cells. But we've got intuition, pattern recognition, and we've been coding under pressure since before your species developed organic silicon. Vel approached the console slowly. You will report to the evaluation chamber for performance validation. Immediately, Matthew blinked. Wait. You think I cheated? There is no record of a human completing the Listari protocol in under 20 minutes. You did it in 5, this must be verified, Matthew sighed. Fine, but I want a banana after this. The ones you synthesize taste like sadness. Vel didn't respond. He gestured toward the exit tunnel and Matthew followed. The evaluation chamber was 3 levels down, past the hydroponics bay and the xenopsychology wing. As Matthew walked, students peeked out from archways and alcoves. He wasn't sure if they were impressed or waiting to see him explode. Inside the chamber, he was scanned. Not just physically, his neural activity was mapped, his pulse checked, and his eye movements tracked. He sat in the center of a glass sphere while a set of monitors hovered in a ring around him. Vel appeared behind the glass. You will now replicate the solution, Vel said. New parameters, new stream source, you have 5 minutes. Matthew rolled his neck. I hope your diagnostics are good. I'm not doing this a 3rd time. The new challenge launched. This stream was messier, higher entropy. But the structure was similar. Matthew dove in again. This time he spoke to himself as he coded, letting the monitors record his logic process. Okay, so this node's repeating too frequently, might be an injected loop. Let's isolate it. Yeah, that's better. Thread handler needs a guard clause here. No, wait, use a lockless queue instead. The 5 minutes passed. The program finished. Again, it worked. Vel stood silently for a long time, then he entered the chamber. I do not understand you, he said. That's mutual, Matthew replied. But we're learning, right? Vel turned toward the monitors. You did not use shortcuts. You did not offload computations. Your brain activity suggests high focus, not automation. I'm not a machine, Matthew said. I'm just used to chaos. Humans adapt. That's what we're good at. Vel considered this. You will instruct me, Matthew blinked. What? You will teach me how you did this, not the syntax, the process, the cognition. I must understand. Matthew looked around. The chamber was still humming, the monitors still glowing. You want me to teach you how to think like a human? Vel nodded once. Yes, Matthew scratched his jaw. You might regret that. I must try, Vel said. Matthew shrugged. All right, but I still want that banana. Vel paused. We can synthesize another variant. Make it taste like hope this time. Vel tilted his head. Hope tastes like carbonated citrus, Matthew grinned. You're learning already. 3 days after the evaluation chamber incident, Matthew was still fielding glances like someone who'd walked into a room holding a lit firework. Not hostile, not even especially curious, just the look you give a creature that might explode again if poked. The learning complex's central atrium was a vertical cylinder lined with floating walkways. Matthew leaned on one of the rails, sipping something faintly citrusy and probably not food safe by Earth standards. It fizzed gently against his teeth. Instructor Vel has requested your presence in the logic lab. A voice chirped from a panel beside him. The station's automated assistant sounded like someone trying to impersonate a librarian halfway through a panic attack. Matthew didn't move. Is it optional? Negative. He downed the drink, winced, and made his way to the lab. The logic lab was usually quiet, a place for thought experiments and interface simulations. Now it looked like someone had been trying to solve a murder using algebra. Cables hung from the ceiling, neural processors blinked in odd rhythms, and a large holoscreen displayed a constantly shifting web of symbols that looked like a Venn diagram got into a fight with a subway map. Vel stood at the center, surrounded by 3 Talarians, amphibious bipeds with translucent neck membranes and a single plantari who resembled a walking, armored fern. Matthew didn't say anything. He just waited. Vel gestured toward a floating chair. Sit. You will assist in replicating your cognitive pattern. Matthew raised an eyebrow. Replicating? I thought you wanted to learn the process. I underestimated the complexity, Vel said. We are attempting to simulate your decision architecture to better understand your mental shortcuts. I don't use shortcuts. You don't use known shortcuts, Vel corrected. That is not the same. The Plentari twitched a frond. Begin baseline capture. Matthew sat down slowly. The chair molded around him with a warmth that was almost clingy. A moment later, a soft pulse tapped at his temples. Please remain still, Vel said. What happens if I don't? The Talarian nearest to him clicked its inner jaw. You might trigger a recursive loop in the emulator. It would crash the system. Possibly the station. Cool, Matthew said. No pressure, the light above him dimmed. A neural map populated the holoscreen showing a rough facsimile of his brain in motion. It pulsed in jagged rhythms, unlike the steady cycles of the other species they'd studied. Instead of compartmentalized functions, human cognition seemed to leak across boundaries, bouncing between unrelated nodes like a drunk bee in a greenhouse. Vel stared at the display. This is chaos, Matthew shrugged. Welcome to my head. We expected modularity, said one of the Talarians. Instead we find entanglement. Try being me during midterms. The Plentari made a sound like a coin dropped into a sink. Can you describe your process when you approach a coding problem? Sure, Matthew said. First I panic, then I pretend I know what I'm doing. Then I make coffee, exclude irrelevant rituals. Matthew rubbed his eyes. Fine. I look at the problem, find the part that can break everything and figure out how not to let it. Everything else is decoration. Vel leaned forward slightly. But you do not plan every function in advance. No. That's like trying to write an essay by outlining every sentence before you start. Sometimes you have to just write and fix it later. The Talarians exchanged glances. That is inefficient, one of them muttered. It's not about efficiency. It's about momentum. Vel turned back to the holoscreen. You make decisions before evaluating all outcomes. Right, because if I waited to be sure, I'd never start. There was silence for several seconds. The Plentari tilted its torso. You operate on incomplete data every time. That is reckless, also human. Vel circled the chair, and yet your results are consistently functional. Because I trust the pattern will reveal itself. It always does, eventually. And if it doesn't, Matthew glanced up. Then I start over and do it angry. The Plentari slowly rotated back toward the holoscreen. We are not equipped to model this. No, you're trying to translate jazz into sheet music, Matthew said. It's not going to sound right. Vel gestured toward the monitor. We will attempt a new simulation. This time, you will speak your thoughts aloud as you solve an unknown problem. A new interface loaded. The task was unfamiliar, some kind of hybrid encryption model using nonlinear key propagation. Matthew squinted at the specs. Okay, so it's basically a lockbox that hands you a different key every time you look at it. Clever, Vel nodded. Begin, Matthew muttered under his breath as he worked. All right, let's see. You're using temporal offsets to scramble the hash, but you forgot about predictability across cycles. Okay, I can use a rotating seed based on entropy from the input stream. But that'll collapse if the input stabilizes. So I'll inject some jitter, maybe from a noise generator. Yeah, that'll break symmetry. Now I just need the monitor pinged. Done, Matthew said. The simulation ran. It passed. Vel stared at the screen. Observation, you did not write the solution linearly. Nope, jumped around. Why? Because the middle told me what the start needed to be. The Plentari made a low thrum. That is circular logic. It's how people work. Sometimes you don't know what you're building until you're halfway through. Vel paced slowly. This presents a problem. I figured. We cannot teach this. Sure you can, you just have to teach uncertainty. The Talarians recoiled slightly. One of them hissed. We do not train for failure. That's your problem, Matthew said. Humans fail constantly. That's where we learn. Vel paused. You are suggesting we should encourage error. I'm suggesting you should allow it. You'll never understand how we solve problems if you only study our answers. The room was quiet again, then Vel slowly turned toward the others. Prepare a new protocol. We will attempt controlled failure modeling. Matthew stood up. You're going to simulate me failing? Yes, good luck. I make it look easy. Vel gestured toward the door. You may go. Matthew raised a hand in a lazy salute and stepped out into the corridor. Outside, he ran into Tessa, one of the only other humans in the program. She was leaning against a wall, fiddling with a portable oxygen adjuster. They make you do brain tricks again, she asked. Yup. Did you crash the station? Not yet, she looked him over. You okay? You look pale. They hooked me up to a neural scanner for 2 hours. I think I can taste colors now. She handed him a glucose capsule. You need real food. You're probably hypoglycemic. He popped it in his mouth. Thanks, Doc. I'm not a doctor. Then stop diagnosing me. She gave him a flat look. You get dizzy when you stand up too fast. That's low blood sugar. You're not sleeping. Your pupils are uneven. You need to eat and rest. He rubbed his forehead. Fine, I'll go nap in the hydroponics dome. The air's better there anyway. Take water, and stop letting them treat you like a lab rat. They're not poking me with sticks, just questions. You're letting them mine your brain. You should charge tuition, he chuckled. I'll invoice them in bananas. She shook her head and walked off. Matthew headed toward the dome, legs slightly shaky. He wasn't sure if the fatigue was from the simulation or the caffeine crash. Probably both. Either way, he needed to lie down before someone asked him to solve quantum Sudoku next. Behind him in the lab, Vel stared at the human neural map as it rotated slowly in midair, unpredictable. Nonlinear. Impossibly adaptive. He didn't understand it. But he had the growing suspicion that if he could, it might change everything. Matthew's head was pounding when he woke, sprawled across a bench in the hydroponics dome with one shoe missing and something leafy stuck to his cheek. The artificial sun overhead had shifted to its early afternoon hue, casting a pale amber light that made everything look like it had been dipped in tea. He sat up slowly, pressing his palm to his temple. Should have brought water, he muttered. A nearby maintenance drone chirped as it hovered past, completely uninterested in his decline. He stood, wobbling slightly. The glucose capsule had worn off. His blood sugar was tanking again. His fingers trembled faintly as he pulled on his missing shoe, which had landed in a planter full of stalky blue vegetables. He took the corridor toward the mess hall, keeping to the edge where the lighting was softer. The chill of the ventilation system made his skin prickle. At one point, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, trying to push down the rising nausea. It didn't help. His stomach was as empty as the logic in Vel's lecture slides. By the time he reached the mess hall, his hands were cold and his legs felt like they belonged to a taller, drunker version of himself. He grabbed a bowl of nutrient broth, lukewarm, translucent, and slightly viscous, and slid into a corner seat. Across the room, a group of Zentari students were practicing recursive logic puzzles with a glowing orb that flickered in time with their clicks. One of them noticed Matthew and paused mid-pattern, watching him with a wary tilt of its antennae. He gave a half-hearted wave. "You do not look stable," said a voice to his left. He turned, blinking. A Severina species made of fibrous muscle and exoskeletal plating had taken the seat beside him. It had no visible eyes, but its head swiveled toward him with unsettling precision. "Yeah, thanks," Matthew said. "I'm just low on glucose and high on regret. You have exhibited erratic behavior," it said. "Instructor Vel believes you are deteriorating. That's dramatic. You were unresponsive for over 5 hours. Matthew paused, spoon hovering over his bowl. "Wait, 5? Yes. It is now the second quadrant of the rotation cycle," he exhaled slowly. "Okay, I guess I blacked out. You should report to medical. I don't want them poking around in my brain again. There are alternative diagnostics." Matthew leaned back. "You're not going to drag me there, are you? I lack the authority." The Severin stood. "But if you cease function, I am required to alert command. Fine, I'll go, happy. I experience no emotions." Matthew picked up the bowl, drained it, and stood. His knees buckled slightly, but he caught himself against the table. The Severin tilted its head again, then walked away without a word. Medical was on the lower level, near the environmental controls. The hallway smelled faintly of sterilized air and something citrusy, like synthetic lemon. Inside, he was met by a Delrin medic, tall, crystalline, with slow, deliberate movements. "You are exhibiting signs of glycemic imbalance," it said, scanning him with a triangular device. "Also moderate dehydration, elevated cortisol, and insufficient sleep." "Yeah, I figured," Matthew said, sitting on the edge of the diagnostics table. "Can I just get a saline drip and some glucose?" "No, you will remain here for 2 cycles. That's excessive. You lost consciousness. You are not leaving until your levels stabilize." Matthew sighed. "Fine, but no neural scans." The Delrin didn't respond. It attached a set of leads to his wrist and inserted a soft catheter into his arm. The solution was cool as it entered, and he felt a faint flush of energy as the glucose hit his bloodstream. "Do not attempt to stand," it said. He laid back, staring at the ceiling tiles, each one displaying a smooth, shifting color meant to promote relaxation. It just made him dizzy. After a few minutes, his hands stopped shaking. He flexed his fingers experimentally. "You are pushing your neurological limits," the Delrin said. "Human physiology is not designed for sustained intellectual output under extreme pressure." I wasn't given a choice. Vel wanted a full mental map. "You should have refused. He's my instructor. You are not required to comply with unsafe requests." Matthew turned his head. "You think it was unsafe?" "Yes, you are exhibiting classic signs of cognitive overstrain. If repeated, it may result in long-term dysfunction." He stared at the ceiling again. "I didn't think it was that bad. Humans often underestimate internal damage." There was a pause. Then the Delrin added, "You are not obligated to prove yourself." Matthew closed his eyes for a moment. "Yeah, well, sometimes it feels like I am." 3 hours later, he was released with a strict set of instructions: no coding for 48 hours, no stimulants, and mandatory rehydration every 2 hours. He left the medical wing feeling slightly more human and slightly more annoyed. Up in the logic lab, Vel was waiting. "You disappeared," Vel said. "I passed out. Kind of a human thing. You endangered yourself." "I didn't realize you cared." "I do not. But your data becomes less valuable if you expire." Matthew rubbed his face. "That's comforting." Vel motioned toward the console. "We have completed the simulation model. It is inaccurate." "Of course it is. It does not replicate your decision behavior. You can't replicate intuition." Vel folded his arms, an affectation he'd picked up from observing humans. "Then how do we proceed?" "You don't," Matthew said. "You stop trying to turn us into algorithms. You want to understand how we think. Then stop treating creativity like a bug in the system." Vel was silent for a long moment. "The Plentari have proposed a compromise," he finally said. "We will analyze your work retroactively without neural mapping. Observation only, no stimulation, no simulation." Matthew shrugged. "Fine, but I'm not writing code for a few days." "You are restricted, doctor's orders. You appear functional." Matthew pointed to his temple. "Yeah, but I'm not. I overclocked myself. Now I'm throttling down." Vel nodded slowly. "We will wait." "No rush," Matthew muttered. "My genius isn't going anywhere." As he turned to leave, Vel added, "Your performance has resulted in a curriculum update. The Listari protocol is no longer marked as impossible for humans." Matthew paused at the doorway. "Good," he said, "because it never was." He walked out, hands in his pockets, stomach still queasy but head a little clearer. Back in the lab, Vel turned to the simulation team. "Delete the replication model," he said. One of the Talarians blinked twice. "Delete, but it contains terabytes of neural data." "It is useless," Vel replied. "Human cognition cannot be emulated. It must be witnessed." Later that evening, Matthew sat on a bench overlooking the outer hull, watching the stars drift past. Tessa joined him, handing over a sealed bottle of something that looked suspiciously like real juice. You alive? She asked. Barely. You finally learn your limits. For now, she nudged his shoulder. Don't die proving a point. He took a sip. The juice was tart and cold and tasted vaguely like earth. I didn't do it to prove anything, he said. I just didn't like being underestimated. Tessa leaned back, resting her head against the bench. Welcome to being human in space, she said. They sat in silence, the hum of the station echoing faintly in the background. For once, Matthew didn't need to write anything. The stars weren't asking him to solve a problem. They just were, and that was enough.